on the other one, you bastard!
With Earthrise having pretty much exhausted the well of G1 characters, there are only really a few more that still need to be done. As such, Hasbro has recently moved away from doing classic characters that haven't gotten their due, and moved on to classic characters that have. Recently, in fact. Well, comparatively recently. 10 years ago is still recent, right? As such, I thought I'd bring back a concept that I haven't touched in a while. Introducing the return of the Versus Review, a concept where I pit two similar Transformers against each other. And today, well, we've got quite the peculiar matchup. When Kingdom was first announced, I was excited for every figure but one. Every figure but two, actually. Warpath appeared to be continuing the sameness that was quite prevalent in Earthrise, with a compromised robot mode that, on first glance, didn't seem to push the envelope with its engineering. Basically Run Amok Runabout 2.0. However, when I received him, I was honestly quite surprised by the amount of effort they put in. Feels to me much more like an Optimus than a Cliffjumper. But this begs the question, how does this figure stack up to the 2010 version, one of the highest regarded deluxes of its time? Well, to answer that, greetings Cybertronians, I'm DrLockdown, and today's double diagnosis pertains to 2010 Generations Warpath and WFC-K6 Kingdom Warpath. So we're all aware of the current generation's philosophy, taking highly accurate show models and then chucking greebles all over them, whilst making the alt mode as close as possible without getting caught for copyright infringement. Basically what third party does with their vehicle modes, except Hashtag is a big company and they don't deal with all that legal bullshit. Most of the time. However, classics and older generations, for those who joined the fandom recently, was more on the line of modernizing designs. What would happen if these classic G1 characters were designed today, whilst still keeping the core idea intact? I actually kind of miss this approach, which is probably why I love so many of the Nightverse designs. It's basically what classics was doing for a new generation. Either way, these two alt modes are going for completely different aesthetics, so ultimately, which one ends up being more successful should be determined by how each executes its idea. As far as the 2010 version goes, I'd say it does a bang-up job of replicating a Halo Scorpion-esque H-Tank.
Firing main cannon.
Now right off the bat, this change is going to ruffle some feathers. Even when this thing first came out, people were pissed off by the decision to make him this sort of vehicle. H-Tanks are often perceived as lazy, despite the fact that I think most H-Tanks Hasbro have put out, at least as far as I can think of, have all incorporated rather unique transformations. Well, maybe not Legion Legends Warpath, but even then none of these are bad figures. Still, if you are somewhat allergic to H-Tanks, then that's your decision made right there. The Kingdom one will be the only option for you. Might as well turn off the whole damn video. However, for those who don't have such predispositions, this is a remarkable H-Tank. I know this is fairly common for mainline handlings of this vehicle type, but this far from feels like a robot lying down. Part of this is because it's not, and it does go through plenty of transformation, but part of it is also the truly impeccable sculpt work. One criticism of the Classics line was the often haphazard application of sculpting. These days, the War for Cybertron trilogy figures very easily line up with each other, even with the beasties. But from Classics to pre-Prime Wars generations, even figures within the same wave would have vastly different aesthetics. To some, like myself, that was part of the charm, but for modern collectors, it may be a turn-off. However, I'm happy to report that this particular example lines up quite well with most modern figures. The vehicle mode is quite different, but it works surprisingly well with both Cybertronian and Earth-based vehicle modes. All of the details feel purposeful, with tons of vents, rivets, and implied openings. Even the 3mm weapon clips blend into the design decently, a gimmick that has been lost over the years. Can't say it's a sad or welcomed removal, I'm indifferent on it being left behind. The weapon pods blend in pretty well too, with some clever profiling and nice use of gunmetal plastic. The one on the right side does look a little empty without the missile, which like most people I have somewhere but have no idea where said somewhere is, but from a distance it's fine. The paint also helps it from looking too bland. There's not that much overall, with a few splotches of black and silver here and there, but that's because most of the budget went into two places: the robot mode details, which you can't really see from here, and the treads, which are done in this absolutely stunning silver. It's the same silver that's seen on the top, but it looks especially premium on the but it looks especially premium on But it looks especially premium on the underside here. Nailed it, finally. From certain angles, it looks like there are two separate tones, but I believe it's just the lighting. It is a nice effect, though. The paint overall is far from minimalist, but it's definitely more reserved than the Kingdom version. As a result, though, they're able to go nuts on the tampagraphs. You've got your garden variety Autobot symbols on the back, but at the front, they managed to incorporate his catchphrases from the Generation 1 cartoon.
Hoist, old buddy! I think it's time that BAM joined the party! No laser power left, but we're still gonna whoosh clean their clocks!
I realize many people will find this stupid, but honestly I'm all for callbacks like this. It's a cheeky wink wink nudge nudge moment that gets the nostalgia boner going without compromising the entire design to be closer to a screen model that is overall bullshit. References like these are cool, and I wish they'd come back in full force, but overall it's an utterly fantastic alt mode. If I had to complain about anything, there are only two minor issues I can think of. The first is this big chunk of unpainted plastic at the front here. Yes, even in the long past days of 2010, Mainline was plagued by the curse of Games Workshop grey. It's sad because despite them fitting his entire midriff under the turret, it all blends in in exceptionally well, except for this part. Since it's not attached to a ball joint or anything similar, I can't imagine why they chose this type of plastic. Couldn't they have gone with red? I suppose maybe it's because it holds the whole section together, but in that case a darker shade would have been greatly appreciated. They've already got gunmetal on the turrets, so why not reuse it here? Sadly, it would seem the Takara United version is quite similar in this regard, so there's no way around it. Not that you'd want to get that version though, as it emits the tamper graphs.
Disgusting!
And secondly, the back section is a smidge hollow. This, however, I can forgive much more easily. Given how enjoyable the transformation is, small things like this are easily ignorable. It often gets hidden from the front anyway, and it's certainly better than the alternative that figures like Cliffjumper offered. On the topic of parts forming, and yes, that is a pretty awful segue, Kingdom Warpath converts into an approximation of a Sheridan, and that's basically the only type of tank I know because I'm not a vehicle mode guy. So I'll leave it to the eager commenters to check the wiki and tell me the exact model of tank. This tank is also lush, but in a wholly different way. For starters, the mechanical detail is off the charts. Yeah, the 2010 version had greebling, but this easily outclasses that. More vents, more panels, more rivets, more, well, everything. It looks like it rolled straight out of whatever World War these things took part in and straight into a Girls of Panzer parlor, since red tanks wouldn't make much sense. Matter of fact, neither does the turret design. I could be wrong, as I'm far from a tank expert, but none of the Sheridans I've seen on Google Images have a turret like this. Even the wiki entry for what this is supposedly based on looks completely different. Okay, I lied. I did actually check the article for this. Sorry for trying to be informed. I'm just that kind of bastard. Either way, this isn't what a Sheridan looks like. This is what G1 Warpath looks like. Something people often forget is that the G1 minibots were from the microchange line, as opposed to meaning that these weren't intended to be full-scale vehicles. They are meant to be penny racers, or in Japan, Choro Q, which is oddly enough where the two iterations of Q Transformers come from. The point is, these are supposed to transform into super deformed toys, but when they got Americanized, they just became regular old vehicles. That's why the original toy had such a bulbous turret, and that's why the Kingdom version attempts to mimic that. In photos, this looks naff, and it was one of my biggest issues in the lead up to me receiving my copy. In person though, honestly it looks fine. Yeah, I would have much preferred a flatter turret akin to the Fans Toys rendition, which I would have gotten if the transformation wasn't a nightmare, but having this in hand, it honestly looks fine. It's definitely helped by the aforementioned phenomenal mechanical detail. What really helps bring this together though, is the quite ambitious paint job. It's kind of funny that the first wave of each trilogy has gotten its own awesomely engineered matte red Autobot deluxe that gets redecoed into 100 selects releases. Well, Cliffjumper would have been awesomely engineered if it wasn't for the... Granted, the execution here is probably the weakest of the three, with a sort of patchwork effect of matte red paint and unpainted plastic, not helped by the haphazard execution of the forearms, but given the militaristic nature, I don't particularly mind. The only section where it looks super out of place is the dome on the top. This looks pretty bad, but other than that, it all blends in exceptionally well. As far as looks are concerned, there's not much I could ask for. Yes, it might come a bit chipped out of the box, but that's mostly QC issues, which as we all know have plagued the line from the start. We all know how bad War for Cybertron QC is, let's not harp on it. As far as chipping after opening, it's about as durable as the last two examples, that is to say, durable as f***. You'd expect that though, it's only attempt number 3. I do kinda wish the Autobot symbol was a bit more centered, or placed somewhere else on the body, but they're trying to mimic the G1 toy, so there's not much they can do. Speaking of though, I personally wish they'd gone the toy route with realistic silver treads, much like the 2010 version did. Kingdom Warpath does not do that, it goes for the El Cheapo Sunbow chart white. No, the toy itself isn't El Cheapo, far from it. They put a lot of budget into painting these in a quite well done off-white. It's just that conceptually it looks cheap because, big surprise, that's what the Scream model was meant to be. Not having to paint in the grey means less budget. That's the thing with most Sunbow models. They're designed to be easy to draw to save on time and, consequently, budget. Even though comparatively this looks far better than, say, the Final Victory version, I still feel this is a little disappointing. I cannot count this as a genuine criticism, but I can count it as a nitpick that sits in the back of my mind and slowly drives me insane. Because as far as everything else goes, this is a fantastic tank mode. Even with the restrictions to adhere to the source material, this feels like a realistic tank. Also glad they didn't gimp the size too much. Would I have loved this to be a big beefy deluxe or even a Voyager? Sure, and even ignoring vehicle mode scale, Warpath feels like one of those beefy characters. Hell, I might just grab an oversized KO if they make one. But no, G1ers would have complained about the minibot scale and yada yada, so this is a nice middle ground. It's small enough to satisfy that vocal minority, but not too small to compromise the engineering like Cliffjumper, although it does have some compromises, which we'll get to, but overall, yeah, I'll take it. Both of these tanks, on paper at least, excel in executing what they set out to do. We've got a wonderful little H-tank and a wonderful little tank. If that was the end of it, I could easily call this a tie. However, this is where things get complicated. For those who haven't been keeping up with recent reviews, Kingdom Warpath incorporates parts forming into his transformation. Kinda. See, up to this point, I've actually left the panel in question off entirely. Taking a look at the front here, you can see this hollow section. Honestly, it's not that noticeable. We've had many similar cases with tanks in the past, and I've given leeway to much worse examples. The figure you see before you is capable of transforming without parts forming. For the most part, it holds together satisfactorily. So, problem solved, right? Parts forming isn't necessary, only optional, correct? Well, not necessarily. See, my copy is perfectly capable, but not every copy is. Whether parts forming is 100% necessary on your copy or not is dependent on basically a 50-50 chance.
If this weren't here, the tank mode would not stick together. You can see it's already fighting to come apart.
I've got friends who have good Warpaths and friends who have bad Warpaths. And even then, this copy, sometimes at random, it just won't hold together no matter what I do. Like, I'm writing this script right now and it's working perfectly, but I have no idea what it's going to be like when I'm filming the damn thing. Now, as frustrating as it is, I have heard that thickening the pegs with some super glue or floor polish mitigates this issue. I've never attempted this method, as most of the time my figure works fine, but hey, allegedly the fix works well. Look, categorically I see parts forming as a completely avoidable slight on the figure. No, I'm not talking about Headmasters or Combiner Kibble, I'm talking your garden variety, like Cliffjumper, Nicey, or Athena. Yes, the parts forming in question isn't as bad as Cliffjumpers, given there are workarounds and it's a fairly small piece that actually attempts to make a convincing shield or pauldron. And yes, you may not even have to quote-unquote fix yours if you're lucky, but it's still there, it's still the intent of the design. If you ignore the parts forming, these two are neck and neck. Both are amazing at what they do. The articulation is basically identical, one of them has better mechanical detail, but the other one has hilarious callbacks. I mean, the Kingdom version doesn't roll as well, but that's such a minor thing to nitpick. It's basically a non-issue when you take into account the amount of panels in the treads that partake in the conversion. However, as far as I see it, it's impossible to ignore parts forming. I'm sorry, but to me it basically spits in the face of clever engineering ideologies. Honestly, it baffles me that faux parts get such a bad rap, but something like this is perfectly acceptable. Maybe to you, the viewer, such a rant is unjustified, but to me it drastically lowers the enjoyment of this vehicle mode. Or, well, it would if my copy wasn't one of the lucky ones. See, explaining this is incredibly complicated. Maybe, possibly, you'll have forced parts forming, and if you do, you'll probably be able to fix it. But thanks to the uncertainty, I'm gonna have to give the vehicle mode win to the 2010 version. That's not to say I dislike my copy of the Kingdom one. I love both of these alt modes. It's just a weird and confusing situation, but ultimately not an irredeemable one. However, given that my copy is fine, that's only one mode where the Kingdom version has lost. There are plenty of moments to gain the upper hand going forward. For example, as far as the differences in transformation go, the outcome is completely not what I was expecting. I mean, everyone would think that because this guy is the more G1 accurate design based on a simpler model, this guy would easily have the better transformation. I mean, it makes sense. The reason they probably chose the H-Tank is because these kinds of vehicle modes lend themselves to incredibly fun and unique transformations. You have to really think about how not to make it just a robot lying down. And it results in a pretty clean robot mode. So yeah, it's looking like this would be the better transformation, and it does have a fantastic transformation indeed. Using the word indeed like Prime versus Prime. First thing you want to do is bring these rocket pods up so that they stay out of the way of the rest of the transformation. Separate this whole section and it folds up on the hinge there and also up on the ball joints at the thighs. Separate the thighs, come around to the back and untab the treads from there, then fold that down just a little bit, collapse into the leg and then lock it into place with the tread. And finally orient it. Very smooth leg transformation. That is very satisfying. Now, so we don't have a bunch of stuff wobbling up here, we might as well collapse the chest as well. Fold down this panel, fold down that panel, and then make sure that panel from earlier is all the way back and the turret straight so that you can collapse the whole chest into each other. So clean. Come around to the back and open up this panel. That will unlock the forearm so you can rotate it down. Push in this tab there so you can bring out the fist and then bring it all the way and collapse the panel. And another very satisfying transformation for the arm. Now this is the real concerning part of the transformation, because most people love the head reveal because it just goes ka-chunk, in, bam, awesome, zowie, blammo, by pushing in the cannon there, but I wouldn't recommend doing it that way. The face here is painted in red, and although I have done that method quite a bit and it hasn't chipped, there is still the potential there. So what I would recommend doing is bringing up the panel first and then doing the head reveal, just for the longevity of the paint. Now, I'm not saying this paint chips very easily. It is incredibly durable, a testament to how strong paint was back in the 2010s. But it's better to be safe than sorry. Transform it that way, and you'll have a better figure in the long run. But yeah, with that kind of transformation, you'd think, wow, it's right in the bag. There's no way they can top that. And for many years, people thought that. People thought this would be the definitive Warpath transformation. It was known for how fun it was. However, this is where things get interesting. Now, for Kingdom Warpath, the first thing you want to do is remove the panel here, if it's there in the first place. You might have a good copy that holds together quite well without parts forming, so it might not be there anyway, but if it is there, you take it off. The first thing you want to do is come to the back, push in that panel there, and collapse that whole thing into there. I used to hate that part of the transformation because it seemed so clunky in comparison to everything else, but now, yeah, it's fine. Just took a bit of getting used to. Separate the legs, and that will allow you to unhook the arm arms from there. The legs actually have their DNA in the 2010s version, but it dials everything up to 11. You take this panel and fold it down ever so slightly, just so that you have enough clearance to fold in the foot. You can then fold these all together and fold the panel down, rotate this entire section into the back of the foot, take this back section and peg it into there, and then rotate around like that. Yes, it's a bulbous foot, just like the G1 design, but that is an incredible transformation. So clever. There's just so many moving parts that work in tandem with each other. It's insane how much engineering went into these things. The designers had a field day designing this. Just one thing you want to avoid is pulling out the ankle tilt too much while transforming it, because then you get that horrible clicking noise as it goes back, which I'll explain why later. Now, unfortunately, there is no head reveal like the previous one, but because it's such a complex design, that's fine. But also, unfortunately, you have to transform it before you lock the arms into place. That is a bit of a bummer, but, you know, whatever. It has to be what it has to be. Much like the original push in the turret, a good thing they actually included that. You take this back panel and peg it into place, and that locks everything together nice and solidly. Then, finally, you rotate the arm around a little bit and fold in the tread like so. Personally, I would have preferred them to have these fold in much more so that they're completely invisible, because this was kibble on the original design, and why the Sunbow designers chose to make it this way was kind of stupid. But hey, at least they fold in to a substantial degree. They're not just sticking out the back there crazily. I mean, if you want them to be more prominent, you can keep them out like that, and some people will prefer that, but come on, I personally think that looks better. But overall, I was incredibly surprised by the Kingdom transformation. Those legs, they just make this figure. Yes, this is a fantastic transformation, but this is a fantastic-er transformation. I was fully expecting this to be a boring slog just to be closer to the cartoon, but in actuality, it shares many similarities with Trigger Happy. The transformation is just as much of the point as the design itself. It's fun, it's complex, but it's intuitive. It is, so far, my second favorite transformation of the year. Yeah, Cyclonus exists, what you gonna do? But ultimately, I have to give the win to the Kingdom version. 100% not the result I was expecting. So now we've got the vehicle mode win for the 2010 one, and the transformation win for the Kingdom one, so it's a tie at the moment. I suppose the robot mode will be the tiebreaker. Now, unlike the vehicle mode analysis, the robot modes are far more similar, so direct comparison is much easier. They're both stylized slightly differently from each other, but it's not like we're dealing with two different planets of origin. When it comes to pure visual appeal, though, the 2010 version takes the cake. The H-Tank, whilst being far from a robot lying down, was a clear choice to make the robot mode better in the long run, and dear God, it paid off. The proportions are borderline perfect, with the fantastically well-built legs, the powerful shoulders, and the perfect torso. It's also completely filled in from practically every angle. Hollowness wasn't exactly common back in those days, but given how much everything compresses, it's still highly commendable. The paint as well, my God, all of the sacrifices from the vehicle mode have come to fruition, especially with the gold and silver paint on the shoulders. This guy looks absolutely stunning, and of course the mechanical detail carries over as well, with the newly revealed gunmetal part showing off all the extra goodness. Although it does beg the question, if these gunmetal segments can bear the load of a ball joint, why wasn't it used on the tank? Ah well, fortunately 99% of that annoying Games Workshop grey is completely hidden. The frame surrounding the turret basically disappears into the torso. Yeah, the remaining 1% becomes the back, but who displays, let alone plays, with their figures like that? One nice effect of choosing an H-Tank specifically is that the forearms and the feet have fully functioning treads. Well, not in the rubber sense, but they don't just stop because the engineering dictates they have to. No, they feel like organically added parts of the body. No, not like that. If there was one thing that gave me concern, it's the fact that the bottoms of the feet are painted. Yes, there hasn't been any paint chipping over the years, a fortunate situation shared with the head paint, but if you're going to engage in rough play sessions, paint chipping is entirely possible.
Oh, rough play sessions. That's kinky.
You vanish for basically 2 months, and then you come back to make a sex joke?
Well, what can I say? I'm a wizard of culture.
Point is, they're durable for now, which I suppose is a testament to old Hasbro paint choices being built to last. But I can't say I'm not concerned for the future. Still, that's not the worst issue with this figure. For me, there are two gripes that massively hamper it. Don't get me wrong, they don't tank the score, but they do bug me quite a bit. Firstly, the forearms are way too big and way too far forward. Not only does this make posing them really difficult when the bicep swivel is absurdly low down, but it looks incredibly out of place. It looks like he's wearing Mega Man cannons. Aha! Now I can redeem myself by being a lazy bastard and letting people tell me in the comments what they really are! I suppose on the topic of Mega Man, you can fan mode them to make him do that particular style, but I would have much preferred proper proportions. I can't say that fast. However, even that is slightly more ignorable than the Achilles heel of this figure, or rather the Achilles head. The head sculpt just doesn't work. You've got this awesomely chunky body and then it gets topped off with an almost anorexic face design. I don't mind when they stylize aspects of a character in order to bring their inherent qualities to life, but this seems to be going actively against said qualities. It's not that they painted the Vencel that is wearing a headband, it's that the cheekbones are way too thin. This feels closer to Age of Extinction Grimlock than it does to Warpath, and it's an incredible shame. Everything else about this robot mode is absolutely stunning, but this one element really brings down the design. The Takara version does end up looking ever so slightly better thanks to adding some red paint to the initially grey sideburns, but it doesn't help much. And sadly, you can't swap it out with the Kingdom version. One's a ball joint, the other's a swivel. Alas, it's one huge misstep on an otherwise stunning design. Kingdom Warpath, on the other hand, takes a different approach. The robot mode aesthetic is far more compromised, thanks to the more complex engineering and the much more terrestrial alt mode. That's not to say it's bad, far from it. It's just that put these two side by side, and yeah, as far as display pieces go, the 2010 version demolishes it. The first thing you'll notice is the much closer adherence to the Sunbow model. Now, given the limitations of the size class, the proportions aren't a complete match. It's much stockier, giving off a brawler vibe. If anything, the 2010 version is closer when it comes to the limb layout, albeit with much higher shoulders, a thankful addition. But as far as everything else is concerned, this is basically taking the Sunbow model and plonking it into a realism filter, and as a result, things are automatically going to look messier. Again, not bad per se, but definitely messier than the competition. The legs are probably the biggest offender, with criminally oversized feet and a whole cacophony of kibble at the back. It may seem off-putting to those used to the more clean 2010 rendition, but after going through such a joyous transformation, I'm inclined to ease off on my complaints. It's certainly better they did things this way than what they ended up doing with Double Dealer. The torso is also a little messy, less so, but definitely not without its issues. Given the way the back panel folds over the turret, you get these hollow bits from the front. It's not incredibly egregious, but from certain angles it makes you go, oh, right, that's a thing. It also means the shoulders are incredibly low, but newsflash, that's what was on the original model. Yes, I prefer the more angular look of the 2010 version, but that's not what they were going for. Furthermore, adherence to said model means that you're going to have unfinished treads on the forearms, and, well, I think they handled these quite well. They're visible from the right angles, but they don't jut out from the front. They're also quite small, especially when compared to some of the quite frankly ridiculous third-party versions. Not sure why they put so much emphasis on what is literally meant to be kibble. I appreciate them toning down this design element for the Kingdom release. At least Hashtag's designers are smart when deciding which elements of the Sunbow design they want to include. Honestly, I go as far as to say that the forearms outclass the 2010 rendition. Matter of fact, Kingdom Warpath succeeds in the two places that 2010 Warpath fails, and the other side of that improvement is with the head. It's not a perfect head sculpt like we've been getting with plenty of figures recently. Seriously, when it comes to Transformers, Hasbro has been on a roll lately. But yeah, it's not perfect, but it is still infinitely better than what we got before. Sure, that's thanks to them attempting to copy the model line for line, even if they didn't succeed, but this to me feels much more like Warpath, and even putting the character aside, it feels far more fitting for the design. Again, it's a real shame you can't swap these head sculpts across, because that head on this body would be a remarkable combo. But as it stands, a good head sculpt goes a long way to making you overlook the flaws of a figure, and in general, there aren't that many extreme flaws with Kingdom Warpath. He's still expertly detailed with greebles all over, and although he doesn't have a lot of differing paint, he is still covered in matte red, just as the vehicle mode was. The patchwork is also far less noticeable, especially since the awful canopy is hidden in the chest now. This is a pretty damn good robot mode, and even with the issues, the proportions are far better than most of Earthrise's offerings. I love Earthrise Sunstreaker, but I can't deny that Warpath has a much better aesthetic. Again, I cannot stress this enough, it's not that Kingdom Warpath it's bad, it's that the 2010 version outclasses it visually. If you want a Warpath to put on your shelf that will never be transformed or messed with, the 2010 version is the way to go. However, that's not how I do things on this channel. Earthrise Starscream looks pretty good, but ultimately I gave it a mediocre score due to the hardware. In the same vein, the hardware is where things get real close with these guys. 2010 Warpath has pretty standard articulation for the time. Yes, some figures at the time had waist swivels, even in the deluxe lineup, but it was far from common. He's pretty much stock standard, so there's not much to talk about. Kingdom Warpath also has standard articulation for the time, but here's the thing. War for Cybertron Trilogy articulation is not 2010 articulation. Waist swivels are all but mandatory, ankle tilts are completely mandatory, and more often than not they'll add wrist swivels just because they can. Now granted, the ankle tilts can be a little frustrating, as clicking it back into place causes a stress-inducing ticking noise. It's due to some rather peculiar grill tooling on the inside of the leg, and I'm half tempted to disassemble the damn thing and shave it down. But even so, it has ankle tilts, it has a waist swivel. Putting the two articulation lists side by side, yeah, there's no contest. Sure, it's to be expected given today's engineering, but ultimately one toy has to be categorically better. And well, when you bring articulation into the mix, things once again get messy. 2010 Warpath has better proportions and feels more complete, but Kingdom Warpath has better articulation and, incredibly importantly, the better head sculpt. I mean, I guess Kingdom Warpath has more accessories with the shield, pegs on the side, and becomes a pauldron for some action, but are you really going to give the win to a figure because of its accessories, especially when it's a parts forming one? So, as silly as it is, I have to give the robot modes a tie, and when you combine the win for vehicle mode with the 2010 version, and the win for the transformation of the Kingdom one, well, this whole match is a draw. This is the whole reason I wanted to make this review. For the first time in my collecting journey, I cannot definitively say that one is better than the other. These two are both top tier figures, providing some of the best Transformers experiences of their times. Ultimately, all I can say is grab either one of them, or both. Both are fantastic. You can't go wrong no matter what you do. If you only want one for your collection, then just go for your preferences. If you want one a certain size, go with that. If you prefer the Halo callbacks, go with that. If you prefer the G1 aesthetic, go with that. As someone who respects all continuities and styles of the franchise, I see these as equal value figures. This might be a cop-out to some, but I'm sorry, I just can't decide between these magnificent bastards. So given that the pretense of Versus review has basically been thrown out the window, I guess all that's left to do is give them a score. And I guess the score itself is a cop-out, but these toys both do amazing things. Yes, they both have their issues, but a 5 out of 5 doesn't indicate a perfect figure, it just indicates a top tier one. And ultimately, even though I still think I prefer the Iron Factory one overall, just given its sheer creativity, these are both top tier. Their engineering prowess is undeniable, so I can't really think of a better way to end this video. But fear not, future Versus reviews will be far more traditional. I just had the urge to write this script, and now I finally have that out of my system. Either way, looking back to a time long past, or looking to the future with a brilliant start to Kingdom, there's absolutely no way you can go wrong.